So this is our last week on Emily Dickinson. And can you go to screen sharing with the poems?
Okay. Let me do that. Mm.
So Leslie, we are going to go to twice a week. We just decided that we'll do that. So we'll start next Tuesday. Okay, so we're going to start with this poem, which is like I heard a fly buzz when I died, in that the speaker has already died, which is a really daring and imaginative way to adopt a persona. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove. He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. The dews grew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We passed before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. So this is, really different from I heard a fly buzz when I died, in that this imagines a kind of romantic narrative, right? That death is the gentleman caller. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me, as if he's coming to take her on a date. The carriage held but just ourselves. So they're driving in a carriage, and the third member of this little date is immortality, which is just an amazing way to start a poem. And then she kind of is moving through time toward eternity. We slowly drove. He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. Now it's as if she's starting back with childhood. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring, and then moving away from town, away from Amherst, Massachusetts, perhaps, into the farm country. We passed the fields of gazing grain. And it's interesting that she chooses gazing. It sounds great with grain, gazing grain with the G sound and the long A, but also as if the grain is curiously watching as this odd carriage slowly rumbles by. We passed the setting sun, and all of a sudden you're, light years out there, right? Or rather, he passed us, which to me is so odd and so mysterious, as if they're farther away than the sun. The sun passes, it arcs across them. The dews grew quivering and chill. Sure, it's getting toward evening, but we're also in outer space. And then she describes her date dress, her gossamer gown, her tulle tippet, the little shawl she's wearing. Is she a bride of awe, a bride of death? Is she, a girl on a prom? So odd. Now we passed before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. And it took me years of reading this poem to realize that she's describing a grave here. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground, right? So we've passed through death, through the grave. Since then, 'tis centuries. This is a long, long, long date, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity, ending with a dash that opens this poem up into eternity, into timelessness, into foreverness, you know? So I wonder if anybody has comments on this poem.
What are the horses' heads in?
Well, they're driving in a carriage, a horse-drawn,
Okay.
and the horse's heads, the death is holding the reins, and he's holding the reins, and the horses are going toward eternity, galloping along forever and forever and forever.
That's classical, like Pluto with his chariot and his horses.
It's true. It's true. But one thing I love about this poem is it's not terrifying, you know? It's like she casts it. If you start thinking about it, if you start thinking about, the sun passing you and the air growing chill, the dews growing quivering and chill. And then I realize, oh my God, I'm headed for eternity. There's no coming back from this date, you know? And
And
it gets a little frightening, but it's so genteelly told. Yes.
I thought I read the setting sun thing a little differently. I thought it was when she said the sun passed us. I read that as just the sun set.
Oh,
We passed the setting sun. It set, and now we're in the evening with the gossamer dew and so forth. So I didn't read it as going into space. I read it as part of that same journey along and then through her past.
Yeah, I read it that way too. It's like they go past the sunset into the night.
yeah. Well,
I
that's kind of equally terrifying. Yeah, Leslie?
um I was interested in the fact, I mean, to me, it's like the horse of Hades and all that, but it's also like what would have happened at the time she lived if you were witnessing your own funeral on your funeral carriage. And what's interesting to me is that she becomes aware that that's what it is when that's the day that she surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. It's as if she's died, she's in her coffin, she's going toward her grave, and then that last um, day of mortal thought is after she's dead. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? But it's she realized she's going toward the grave, but also that is eternity. It's a total shift in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all of you are right. And I think one thing that's so great about this poem is that there's no one single right way to read it, you know? But what I love about it so much is that it's so much told in the terms of mid-19th century courtship behavior, you know, stopping for your date and wearing the tulle and the gossamer and riding in the horse-drawn carriage. And then all of a sudden you get this whatever kind of terrific zoom effect it is. It's like you're passing through all of time from childhood through into night, and it just keeps going and going. Brilliant use of the dash at the end of that poem. And we're going to look at another poem where a dash at the end is equally effective. So let's zoom on a little bit. So it doesn't matter what the occasion was for Dickinson's poems of incredible mental distress. Various people have hypothesized various things, various illnesses of the mind. This is sometime in the early 1860s when she wrote over 500 poems in a year. So she's writing sort of like Sylvia Plath at the end of her life, more than a poem a day, and under incredible pressure, incredible pressure of the imagination, of the feelings, anxiety, whatever. So she wrote a number of poems trying to describe this sense of torment. That's the best way I can say it. And here's one of them, where again, she's trying to feel her way into finding words for something that can't really be talked about except through these paradoxical images. It was not death, for I stood up and all the dead lie down. It was not night, for all the bells put out their tongues for noon. It was not frost, for on my flesh I felt sirocco's crawl, nor fire, for just my marble feet could keep a chancel cool. And yet it tasted like them all, The figures I have seen set orderly for burial reminded me of mine, as if my life were shaven and fitted to a frame and could not breathe without a key. And 'twas like midnight, some, when everything that ticked has stopped and space stares all around. Or grisly frosts, first autumn morns, repeal the beating ground. But most like chaos, stopless, cool, without a chance or a spar or even a report of land to justify despair. Despair is a word that she uses judiciously and not infrequently at, at the end of poems. And this is one of those times. So what trying to go through a kind of via negativa, kind of not this, not that, not this, not that, to describe something that really is indescribable, an indescribable kind of suffering, whatever it is that she's talking about. Peter, here's the phone. Sorry. Whatever it is that she's talking about can't really be, talked about in a straightforward way. She's not labeling it. She's finding images to describe it. It's not death. It's not night. It's not frost. It's not fire. And yet, it's like Leslie just mentioned, the bodies laid out on their funeral, ceremonial pyres, or not pyres, but biers. And then this feeling of constriction that we know from our own anxieties, right? As if my life was shaped and fitted to a frame and could not breathe without a key. This feeling of just incredible pressure. And then trying to talk about the way space just opens up. She's being watched. Space stares all around. And then referring to weather, first autumn morns, when repeal the beating ground, it's like the heart of the ground has stopped. And then what? This, again, surreal image, but most like chaos. Stopless. You can't stop it. There is no stopping it. Cool. It's not hot, it's cool, without a chance or spar or even a report of land to justify despair. Let's go on to the next one and then talk about them both together, okay? Yeah, this is an amazing one too. I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading, treading, till it seemed that sense was breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service like a drum kept beating, beating, till I thought my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul with those same boots of lead again. Then space began to toll, as all the heavens were a bell, and being but an ear, and I and silence, some strange race wrecked, solitary, here. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing. Then, when I was in a graduate class one day, I was asked to read this poem out loud, and I sort of put a period after then, and the professor said, "There's a dash there. It's not over yet." It's like there's more to come, you know? So I wonder if people have things that they'd like to say about these poems, which are incredibly powerful, which are, you know, I think really richly unspecific. She's not giving them labels. She's describing experiences. And she's kind of reaching toward the very limits of language to try to describe these experiences that are really pretty indescribable. Because if they were describable, they would not have to do with this, with the frame of mind that's existing.
it certainly feels like she's physically in distress, that she's failing, that her health is failing, and that she's looking at death in a much more direct and proximate way than in some of the earlier poems.
Leslie?
Well, just in general, it's this gradual loss of all this sensory input. And then she knows she's alive, but it sounds like such an extreme depression. If anybody's ever had mild depression and they see that colors change, colors don't look the same way they do. Um, and other things can be affected, but it's like she, in the second poem, she's going almost into total loss. First, she's just an ear, she's not seeing anything. And then this plunge into total loss of consciousness. But I had a question about the poem before that. That last image of her floating in chaos. I mean, I'm guessing it's that because I'm imagining a shipwreck and there's a spar there that you might grab a hold of to save
Right.
yourself or a report of land. And then it says to justify despair. But it seems to me like if there had been a spar or a report of land, that would be justifying hope rather than
Yeah.
despair. So that was confusing me.
I have an idea about
Peter has
that.
an idea.
Okay,
To justify despair is the kind of despair where you say, I almost could make it to that land over there, but I can't. Or I could almost grab a hold of that spar, but I can't. And this is something that is beyond that kind of despair because there's nothing to feel. If only I had made it that far, I would be okay, since everything is chaos. I don't think it necessarily means a low physical state. It means some kind of intensely painful emotional state
Yeah.
that may or may not be connected to what's happening with the body. But as far as I know, these are early poems
Yeah.
and her health was good.
Yeah. Yeah, they are early poems. They're from the 60s. She lived till the 80s, and she was in bad health at the end of her life. But it seems that during 1861, 1862, she refers in a letter to, having lost a whole winter. It's like something was going on. And we don't know, people don't know. This is why people still write so much about her and do so much research about her. Was this having to do with, a love that she couldn't realize? Was this having to do with, whatever it was? It just was this acute agony in the mind where she's writing so much and she's writing so brilliantly and under such incredible pressure and finding these weird, weird images to try to talk about. We might talk about like an anxiety attack or a migraine or something like that, but she's enacting it. She's giving us the physical experience of what this kind of distress might feel like.
And when you've mentioned pressure a couple of times, are you're talking about emotional pressure, right? It's
Yeah,
not
but
like her publishers were after her.
no,
No.
no, no,
No.
no, no. But emotional pressure is always manifested in the body, you know? It's like you get a headache or you can't breathe or you're like, like that.
Yeah.
Your body is just in agony.
Well,
That's
it seems like and Tony hit on it. It's like nobody is making her write this.
exactly.
She is when you write at that degree of poetry, she's impelled to do it.
Yeah,
She can't
totally.
stop herself because nobody's saying, "Oh my God, you need to produce all this poetry." It's like she has to do it regardless of what's around her. I mean,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely. And as I said last time, I'm absolutely convinced she knew she was a great poet. She lived, she lived, her life made sense in terms of her poetry.
And
Her life
yet she
was her poetry.
and yet she doesn't seek any external validation of her greatness.
Nope. She's not going to get it in that day and age. Nor does she, I think, probably particularly want it, you know? I mean, look, Emily Dickinson was not your normal cheerful next door neighbor. She was um very, very solitary. very reclusive. She did have close ties with like her sister Lavinia. For a long time was Susan Gilbert, her sister-in-law, with various friends.
Did anybody read these poems?
Yeah, some of them. Oh, Sue Gilbert, she would send poems in letters, and she would show them to Lavinia. I don't know which ones she showed, but she showed hundreds of poems. People knew that she was writing, but the general public didn't know. And also, I would encourage you to read her letters sometime because they're really just as good as her poetry. They're as odd as her poetry, you know? And there's some of them are really beautiful, really beautiful.
I
Like,
think
Maybe you could pick one out for us, Anne, sometime.
yeah,
And
I'll try to do that next time. I'll interrupt Frost a little bit for a
you
letter.
know
Dickinson.
I think the idea of depression or some kind of mental uh, pain is right because unlike the earlier poems where she was observing nature, a robin or snakes or crickets, this is really inward stuff. She's really looking inward and in a painful way. So she definitely. I was surprised when you said that these were early poems. So maybe it wasn't physical illness, but there definitely she was grappling. It seems to me with some sort of painful inner experience here.
Yeah. And don't forget, these are the same years when she's writing those Robin poems and the spiderweb poems and so on. It's not like first there were, relatively benign nature poems, and then all of a sudden there are these. It's like there was this amazing period of productivity in the 1860s.
So apparently, um, she did follow the news of the Civil War, which was going on at this
Yeah.
time. And I was looking for letters by her at this period, and there's a quote from a letter to one of her friends when her brother Austin's good friend was killed in early 1862, and the quote in her letter is Austin is chilled dash by Fraser's murder. He says his brain keeps saying over Fraser is killed, Fraser is killed, just as father told it to him. Two
Yeah.
or three words of lead that dropped so deep they keep weighing. So that's her writing to a friend
Yeah.
about. So you have to wonder: is there some? I mean, I can't believe that even as isolated as she was in New England, that the the ongoing trials and uncertainty and the war not going well did not weigh on her even at a distance, and especially if friends and neighbors were going off to war.
Yeah. No, you're right. There are a few poems that seem to be about the Civil War. Not directly, but indirectly. And of course, Thomas Wentworth Higginson was much involved with the Civil War. He led troops, and he was her friend and in touch with her this whole time. You're absolutely right. And I mean, that might also be adding to the agitation. But these poems, as Barry says, these poems are about inner states of mind, whatever's causing them. And I think it's much greater that we don't know, that we can't say, oh, that was the winter that so and so left her. You know what I mean? It's like we don't need to know. We just need the experience of the poem.
Yeah, but I agree with Laurel, certainly to this extent, that the war was a psychic event for her as much as it was for Walt Whitman, probably more than it was for Henry James, who had two brothers fighting in the war. I'm not saying it's the cause, but I'm saying that she must have felt it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I will send you guys, I'll look for those Civil War poems and send them to you. We won't have time to talk about them, but I'll send them to you so you could take a look. They're kind of beautiful, really beautiful.
let me
Um,
ask let me
yeah,
ask you about the audience once again. She, like I said, she didn't seek any external validation or appreciation. Can you think of another author? I'm sure there must be who cared so little about, because, if you talk to artists, most of them, well, a lot of them have egos and they want to be celebrated. But there are some that don't have egos in that way, and yet the whole point of creating art to them is communicating with other human beings. and to not even try to, you know, get your poems out there so that people would hear them. Can you think of another writer or artist of any kind that was like that?
Um, Peter, who's the European writer who wrote tons and tons of stuff and put it in safe deposit boxes or something and they've never been found?
I don't know about him.
Yeah,
You
there's,
don't mean Blaise Sandrard, do you?
yeah, I think so.
Because Blaise Sandrard also published a huge amount, and I think he was a fine poet, but he was not the least bit shy,
Yeah.
and he had a lot of friends in the literary
Oh, okay.
world. You know,
Yeah.
um, he was out there. I can't think of another
Me neither.
artist of remotely comparable character who
Mm-mm.
paid that little attention.
Mm.
And I think you'd have to go back to the days before print was the normal medium. And even then, most people that circulated their poems in manuscript circulated them more widely than she did.
Yeah. No, I mean she's by herself.
That is just very, well, obviously I asked you. It's very unusual.
It's
And
very unusual, yeah. And she's like one of the greatest women poets there's ever been, you know? She's on a really short list, you know? And definitely one of the greatest American poets. She's just a world-class poet and so unusual. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine finding 1,775 poems in your relative's bedroom after that person died, you know?
I guess Van Gogh comes to mind, although it's not really the same thing, but he also was kind of a loner, obsessive weirdo
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that wasn't concentrating on trying to be successful in the jeu de pomme or something like that. Uh,
Well, you know, I just thought of somebody, Henry Darger. He's a he's a he's a he's a very strange. We saw his work at the Musée de l'Art Brut in Lausanne. Look up Henry Darger, Darger.
Darker.
Darger, yeah. And he was not an artist of this stature, but he was a very, very eccentric artist who did these kind of cartoon strips of like naked little girls with penises and stuff, you know? Pretty weird. Sort of a whole sci-fi or a cartoonish sci-fi landscape that he creates, you know?
He's classified as an outsider artist,
Yeah,
outside the established art establishment, a very,
definitely.
primitivist.
Yeah,
Completely outside. He was a janitor, I think, in Chicago.
yeah, yeah. They found all his stuff in his room after he died, you know, tons and
But
tons of.
Anne, it seems to me, I mean, she did show her work early on to somebody she really trusted and admired, and they said, sort of, you're not ready for prime time yet. And
Right.
she would send her poems, what did they say, along with preserves to her friends, and they liked the preserves better. So
oh God.
I'm thinking, maybe she just said, okay, then, I'm not casting my pearls before swine. I'm going to just do my thing quietly and they'll figure it out later.
Well,
Yeah.
but still to continue to put up that much work. I mean, it would be understandable if she just quit and said, you know, I'm no good at this. But that's not what she did. She continued to produce this tremendous amount of work and then never showed it to anybody.
She's a genius.
Yeah, but also after 1865, the new poems get much fewer.
Yeah, they do. And in general, they get quieter, you know. There's still some really beautiful later poems. But let's move on, okay? Because I want to look at some of the love poems, um, which are just extraordinary. Just so beautiful. I love this one. There came a day at summer's full. And again, she's not telling you what this is about, but look how beautiful it is. There came a day at summer's full entirely for me. I thought that such were for the saints, where resurrections be. The sun, as common, went abroad, the flowers accustomed blew, as if no soul the solstice passed that maketh all things new. The time was scarce profaned by speech. The symbol of a word was needless, as at sacrament, the wardrobe of our Lord. Each was to each the sealed church, permitted to commune this time, lest we too awkward show at supper of the Lamb. The hours slid fast, as hours will, clutched tight by greedy hands. So faces on two decks looked back, bound to opposing lands. And so when all the time had leaked without external sound, each band the other's crucifix, we gave no other bond. Sufficient troth that we shall rise, deposed at length the grave, to that new marriage justified through Calvaries of love. I just think that poem is so beautiful. It's so tender and so heartbreaking. And remember last time I talked about Wadsworth, the preacher who went off to San Francisco and preached at Calvary Church. This may be about him, but I don't believe it's about a real meeting that she had with him. That is, she met him twice in her life. And she wrote to him a few times, and one of his replies to her was, um, expressing the anguish that she expresses in her letter and saying that he's praying for her. But he was married, he was a father, he was not having a wild, passionate affair with her, but she was having a wild, passionate affair with him, do you know? Um, and I mean, this poem, so, so just think about an experience that you've had where you know that a parting is upon you, and every instant is precious, and every instant is hurrying toward that parting. And she's got this beautiful image of each of them standing on an opposite deck looking at each other as their ships pull apart from each other, and then moving ahead the way she'll do at the end of a poem. So when all the time it leaked without external sound, each bound the other's crucifix. We gave no other bond. There's no wedding ring. There's no, you know, anything like that. There's just this connection in pain. Sufficient troth, promise that we shall rise deposed at length the grave to that new marriage justified through Calvaries of love. Now notice I've said that she's always a religious poet, but she's always a poet who does not have easy answers about religion. Her language here is the language, is religious language, but she's using it for human love. I thought that such were for the saints where resurrections be. This is her and this beloved in a day that is so full, so radiant, that it seems as if it's poised in the eternity of the solstice. And they don't need to speak. What could they say? It's just this instant communion. The symbol of a word was needless, as at sacrament, the wardrobe of our Lord, you know? And then each was to each the sealed church, right? So using again this language of the church, but here it's the human heart, and the relationship that does it exist? Does it not exist? It's sealed, it's closed, permitted to commune this time, lest we too awkward show at supper of the Lamb. So I wanted to show you this poem because I think it's, as I said, just absolutely heartbreaking and so tender and so kind of magical, commemorating this hour, this day, this moment, this miraculous communion that then is inexorably being pulled apart and yet will somehow be there at the end of time, you know?
Mm.
Love that poem, makes me want to cry. So let's zoom down a little bit because there's three more poems, love poems that I want to look at with you. I mean, this one's a trip. it's like when you're teaching these poems to undergrads, they don't think that unmarried spinsters are supposed to have erotic feelings, you know? And they'll say like, "Oh, she was an old maid. How she be?" Like that. But look at the passion in these next two poems. Come slowly, Eden, lips unused to thee, bashful, sip thy jessamines as the fainting bee, reaching late its flower, round her chamber hums, counts his nectars, enters, and is lost in balms. Just pass out, just drown in this sweetness, this erotic sweetness that's going on there. But even better, the next one. Let's look at the next one. This is the one that really offends undergrads. They're like, she's not supposed to say this. Wild nights, where I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds to a hard import. Done with the compass, done with the chart, rowing in Eden. Ah, the sea. Might I moor tonight in thee.
Mm.
Look at what she does with meter there too. A trochee is a foot, a poetic foot that goes, you know, da-da, futile the winds, too hard important, done with the compass, done with the chart, rowing in Eden. Ah, the sea. These stresses, these passionate downbeats there, beginning those lines. And I think that rowing in Eden is like the sexiest image in the world because you're not going anywhere you're not moving through the water. You're holding still as far as that goes. But if she's not describing sex, I don't know what she's describing, rowing in Eden. Ah, the sea. And you've got these great images of moor, safety, mooring in thee, being held in thee, and yet rowing at the same time, moving, right? So anybody want to talk about these two poems? Leslie, you're mute.
So, was all this imagery from being on the sea and rowing and being on ships and coming into port, was this all just theoretical, or did she have any experience with travel on the ocean?
She didn't really, did she?
No,
No.
she didn't. There's an early poem that begins, exaltation is the going of an inland soul to sea, past the houses, past the headlands, into deep eternity.
Yeah, yeah,
I think she definitely thought of herself as an inland soul, but sea imagery came really
yeah,
naturally to her.
yeah, yeah, yeah. She's just extraordinary. Just absolutely extraordinary, you know? So comments on these poems?
Very erotic.
Very erotic. I mean, seriously, undergrads they get their knickers twisted about these poems, you know? They can't stand it that this unmarried Victorian lady spinster could write these passionate, passionate, passionate poems and unabashedly, you know? But they're so gorgeous. They're so beautiful.
What
Well,
age was she when she wrote this?
What age? 30, early 30s.
That's
She
not
only lived,
exactly elderly.
no, right. Well, no, but I mean, to an undergrad,
They
you know,
just picture her as elderly
yeah,
because she didn't
yeah,
get married.
yeah.
Done
so
with the compass, done with the chart.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm having a little
Yeah.
trouble sitting still here. I'd have to excuse myself early. Yeah, it's so beautiful.
I just think it's interesting that she chose this language of the sea and navigation, which she had never actually experienced, to express this kind of raw passion and physicality that she also would have expressed only within herself.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
she wouldn't have experienced it with somebody else. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, this water imagery, this imagery of fluidity, flux. turbulence, storminess, you
Well,
know.
also the old meaning of luxury, which she would have been familiar with from the church, is related to, lechery in its root.
Yep.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Is it,
Jeff, what when you say luxury in the church, what was your reference?
Wasn't wasn't luxury sinful?
It was almost a synonym for lust, you know,
Excess.
in Italian and in Middle English and early modern English, I think.
yeah. Ah, my goodness. Beautiful, beautiful poem. And it's so tiny. You know, it's like a poem does not have to be long to pack enormous power. Let's look at the next one, which many people, and I would agree, is her greatest poem. And look at the way this poem keeps twisting and twisting and twisting. I cannot live with you. It would be life. And life is over there behind the shelf the sexton keeps the key to, putting up our life, his porcelain, like a cup discarded of the housewife, quaint or broke. A newer severs pleases, old ones crack. I could not die with you, for one must wait to shut the other's gaze down. You could not. And could I stand by and see you freeze without my right of frost, death's privilege? Nor could I rise with you because your face would put out Jesus, that new grace glow plain and foreign on my homesick eye, except that you, than he, shone closer by. Scroll down. They judge us. How? For you served heaven, you know, or sought to. I could not. Scroll down. Because you saturated sight, and I had no more eyes for sordid excellence as paradise. And were you lost, I would be, though my name rang loudest on the heavenly fame. And were you saved, and I condemned to be where you were not, that self were hell to me, you there.
Mm-mm.
So we must live apart.
Meet apart.
You there, I here, with just the door ajar that oceans are, and prayer, and that white sustenance, despair. Sorry, that really important line got dropped. Let's go back to the beginning and look at it again, okay? So look at the way it keeps going through impossibilities. But first of all, this long three stanza long development of this image of I cannot live with you. It would be life. And this is a very, to me, complicated image. Life is over there behind the shelf the sexton keeps the key to. It's as if life is like an old teacup discarded of the housewife. A newer Sevres pleases, that's a brand of china. Old ones crack. It's as if life, there used to be this phrase, somebody's on the shelf, like in Little Women, Meg is on the shelf. And that means unmarried, a woman who's unmarried. She's on the shelf. She's on the shelf here. She's been put on the shelf. Her life is on the shelf. The shelf the sexton keeps the key to, locked up, put up. So there's the first thing. That's where life is. Life is on the shelf. It's in a church, on a shelf, kept away, cracked, useless, discarded.
Well, excuse me, the sexton also is the grave digger. So the shelf the sexton keeps the key to suggests something like life is on the other side of the grave.
Ah, okay.
I think she means
Okay.
that too.
And then the next one, what? I cannot live with you. I could not die with you. For one must wait to shut the other's gaze down. You could not, and could I stand by and see you freeze without my right of frost, death's privilege? It's like if they can't die at the same instant, this is another emotional impossibility. Now, the next part is really heretical. It's blasphemous and it's so beautiful. And nor could I rise with you because your face would put out Jesus. I would love your face more than I would love Jesus's face. Your face would shine more brightly. That new grace, Jesus, grow plain and foreign to my homesick eye, except that you then he shone closer by. You know, they judge us how, for you served heaven, you know, or sought to. I could not. Why not? Because you saturated sight, and I had no more eyes for sordid excellence as paradise. She's calling paradise a sordid excellence. This is why it says she's not an easy believer. I mean, whoa. And were you lost? I would be, though my name rang loudest on the heavenly fame. And were you saved and I condemned to be where you were not, that self were held to me. So we must meet apart, you there, I here. This is the most important off rhyme in the whole of Emily Dickinson's poetry, because look at what she does. So we must meet apart, you there, I here, with just the door ajar that oceans are, and prayer, and that white sustenance, despair. If she said, why didn't she just say, so we must meet apart, I hear you there, with just the door ajar that oceans are in prayer, and that white sustenance, despair? Well, the answer is because if she rhymed it that way, it would not be a door ajar. Here pulls against that rhyme, against the rhymes of prayer and despair, right? So here is what's going to pull for all of time against being able to close this poem. Do you see what I'm saying? It's so great what she does there. So we must meet apart. You there, I here. Just set off by itself, a dash on either side. Now, with just the door ajar that oceans are, like that's a pretty big door. And prayer, and that again, that white sustenance. What kind of sustenance is despair? Well, it's pure white. It has no color, you know? I mean,
Did you say that she was in love with a clergyman or
yeah.
something?
Well,
I
yeah,
met,
probably so. Charles Wadsworth. She met him in Philadelphia when she and her sister were returning from DC, where their father was for one term in Congress. And she attended his church in Philadelphia. He was a very eloquent pastor. Um, and as I said, he was married and had kids, but she communicated with him. They saw each other twice, separated by, many, many, many years. Um, and I mean, people believe she probably was in love with him. This is probably who she's referring to when she writes the master letters, but nobody really knows for sure. Again, the biographical facts of her life have an awful lot of mystery surrounding them, you know?
seems to, I mean, what I keep feeling in this poem is this kind of earthly love for someone who is not available to her
Yeah.
because he's connected with the clergy or um, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, also because, like, he's not in love with her. He's
Yeah,
married, he's got kids. And
yeah.
then, as I said, he was transferred to San Francisco. And this probably is possibly what she's referring to, the door ajar that oceans are, so far away from each other. She said, that seems like so immeasurably far, so completely lost, And then eventually he did return back east. But I mean, they didn't really, in what we would call, know each other, you know, but she was capable of having these incredibly intense relationships that weren't what we would call relationships. Remember, I mentioned that that's one time when Thomas Wentworth Higginson visited her and they actually talked like for an hour. He afterwards he told his wife that she couldn't believe what a tension headache he had because Dickinson was just so incredibly intense, you know? And then
Um,
late in her life, there was this guy, Judge Otis Lord. He was a friend of her father's and he was a widower and he fell in love with Emily Dickinson and he wanted to marry her. And her reply was, "No is the wildest word that we consign to language," which is really classy. No is the wildest word that we consign to language.
um, I read this slightly differently. Uh, so to me, it was more like a spiritual love as opposed to a carnal love or secular love. And prayer and that white substance, the ocean, that oceans are and prayer and that white sustenance. Could white sustenance refer to prayer? In other words, bloodless, uh, white and sterile, as opposed to uh, something physically. And then despair is just an expression of her feeling at that situation. But anyway, I didn't so much, well, what I related it to, if you'll pardon me, was Augustine's feeling that he couldn't love his son because it was an earthly love without taking his focus. Like there's the line up here about would put out Jesus because your face would put out Jesus. And so I was thinking of Augustine and his love for his son. And if I love my son, it will drown out my love for Jesus.
Hmm.
Similar theology, but a different choice. She's
Hmm.
choosing the man
Yeah,
over
Hmm.
Jesus and salvation.
Hmm.
right.
Yeah, I mean, she can't have him, but she's trying to write about the impossibilities that would arise in a sense if she could have him. Do you know what I'm saying? Again, she's poised on this kind of knife edge of like imagining if I could, well, no, then that would happen. If I could, then that would happen, you know? And this incredible, I would say, kind of theological arrogance of referring to paradise as sordid, referring to the beloved as more radiant than Jesus, you know? There's no, there's no answer to this poem except that white sustenance. I guess I think that if she meant that prayer was the white sustenance, she would just say prayer, that white sustenance, or that white sustenance prayer. But despair is what she's feeding on.
The manna in the wilderness was white. She may be thinking of that.
Yeah.
Uh, the that conflict you're talking about, Anne, between uh, I I read it slightly differently. The let me see, um, where was that line about? I sorted. I'm trying to find it.
Hey, you just passed it. You just
Oh,
passed
oh
because you
yeah. I
I
had no more eyes for sword excellence as paradise. Could that be read? I didn't have my eyes were not so much uh, for sordid excellence as paradise. In other words, because you saturated sight. Um, I don't know. I'm just getting the conflict between a spiritual kind of and a spiritual kind of love and a earthly love, and also it seems to me that I think you said this, Anne. If it were consummated, this love between her and him, then she'd really have a problem, wouldn't she?
then she'd really have a problem. Yeah. Yeah. This great poem. Such a moving poem. Yeah. Any comments on this poem? Anybody else? We're nearing the end of our time. I want to zoom down a little bit and read you her poem about poetry, which I like better than Peter does. I think it's really cool. And this is a brag, right? This is a poem about poetry. Dare you see a soul at the white heat, then crouch within the door. Red is the fire's common tint. But when the vivid ore has vanquished flame's conditions, it quivers from the forge without a color, but the light of unanointed blaze. Least village has its blacksmith, whose anvil's even ring stands symbol for the finer forge that soundless tugs within, refining these impatient ores with hammer and with blaze until the designated light repudiate the forge. So I think this is a poem about what it's like to compose her poems. The soul at the white heat, where the action of the blacksmith with his fires and his anvil and his tongues is just a metaphor for a symbol for the finer forge that soundless tugs within, refining these impatient ores with hammer and with blaze. That's the process of creating the poem until the designated light repudiate the forge. Odd locution there, repudiate the forge. It's like the mortal body, the mortal poet somehow just passes out of existence. And what we've got is this blaze, which is the poem, which is the completed poem, you know?
What about the italicized words in
Yeah.
the first line?
Yeah, what about him? That's how it's always printed. And she probably underlined them, I suppose, in her fascicles, you know, just to really emphasize that at the white heat, you know. This is not just an ordinary soul going about his business, washing the dishes or writing an ordinary poem. This is like in the throes of this consumption, this being consumed by this process. So anybody have any final comments on Emily Dickinson? Oh, let's go back to where we can see everybody, okay? Great. Thank you.
Apropos of nothing, I just found out she's my cousin.
You're kidding me. Are you
Oh,
kidding me?
no, seven generations down the road, I got this thing from ancestry.com that we are cousins. So.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
And just before we started, I was looking in a book I have on Shays Rebellion, and the Dickenson clan was one of the most prominent groups of people that were involved in Shays Rebellion.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very distinguished family. You know, her father helped to found Amherst College and he and the fire department and all kinds of stuff and very prosperous, distinguished conservative family. And she was definitely the eccentric one.
Yeah, well, Shays' rebellion was not so conservative. This means they were on the side of the indebted Western farmers against the federal government. So that's especially interesting from a
Yeah.
prosperous, respectable family.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I wanted to thank you, Anne, for these poems take time. They take reading and rereading. I don't think I've been too much in a hurry when I've read them before, and I really appreciate your going through them so carefully. It's changed my understanding.
She's amazing, and there's so many more. Not all, I don't like all of her poems. You know, I mean, I've read all 1,775 of them, plus all the letters. I told you I was on the verge of suicide by the time I was done. But there's so many more that will just grab you if you slow way down, you know, and read them and reread them. Because yes, she's a very eccentric, kind of gnarly writer, very compressed and very odd, you know. But also some of her poems, let me say, I think I know this one by heart. This it's at the end of what I handed out. And it's another poem about the grave. Ample make this bread, Ample, make this bed with awe. In it wait till judgment break, excellent and fair. Be its mattress straight, be its pillow round. Let no sunrise yellow noise interrupt this ground. I mean, it's a very straightforward poem, but it's so beautiful. And the magic, I think, for me, is in that phrase, the sunrise yellow noise. You know, whoever besides Emily Dickinson would have come up with that phrase? And ample, make this bed. We know that graves are narrow. They're always described as narrow. But she's saying, what ample? Death is ample. Make this bed with awe. Not this stone casket, this bed. In it wait till judgment break, excellent and fair. It's a tender poem. I noticed this because I saw the movie Sophie's Choice, and it's quoted in that movie at some point, at like a really sad point.
This
But
poem,
go
this
ahead.
poem, yeah, this poem is one that I've set to music and handed to a children's chorus. And the music director felt that it was about a cradle. I had to tell her that it was a casket and that the poem is asking the occupant of a casket to sleep and not to be disturbed by sunrise, which is a pale light compared to the intense light of noon, which is a resurrection. So you're to wait till resurrection. That's
Yeah.
what the poem is asking you to do.
Yeah. Of course, remember Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking. And so, the cradle and death and birth, they're all in there together. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Any other final comments on Dickinson before we move on to Frost?
Do you
Jill,
know Helen Vendler's book?
what did you say?
Do you know Helen Vendler's book of analyzing a number of Dickinson's poems?
That one I have not read. I haven't.
I find the poems are so cryptic that it really helps to have a guide
Yeah.
through them.
Yeah, it
And
does.
Helen is not. She collects about 150 of the poems and gives close readings,
Yeah.
and I found that very useful.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of Dickinson criticism and there's a lot of really good books, but I haven't read that one. Yeah. Well, guys, go take a deep breath. Good. Thank you very much for being here. And I will see you Tuesday.
Yeah,
The-
just to clarify now, guys, if you weren't here, we took a vote that we will be meeting twice a week now. So Tuesday, same time, 10 o'clock Pacific time, and I'm pretty sure it's the same URL. And as a matter of fact, didn't you sign on Tuesday by accident? I think somebody did. And so I think the URL will work, but if it doesn't, I will email everyone to let you know. But I think
Right.
it's just the same thing as today.
Good. Thank you. So Frost is a whole lot easier to read. I really like Frost. People will say to me, "You like Frost?" I'm like, "Yeah, I really like Frost." But he's a really great kind of straddle figure. In some ways, he's like a 19th century poet. In some ways, he's a modernist. And so we'll talk about that when we get there. But I'm asking you to start with the dramatic poems and the dramatic monologues. So it's a hefty number of pages, but he's a great storyteller. Okay, thanks a bunch. See y'all Tuesday.
Many
Okay.
thanks.
All right.